The first time I noticed something had changed, it was a Tuesday evening. The kind of evening where nothing was supposed to happen. I had just come home from work, tired but grateful. I'd stopped by the grocery store on the way back to pick up her favorite tea. I remember thinking, she'll smile when she sees this. But when I walked through the door and handed it to her, she looked at the box for half a second and said, "Oh, thanks," like she didn't recognize the gesture. And then she turned away. Her name is Marion. Not Mary. Not Marie. Marion, pronounced carefully, softly. She always insisted on that, and I always remembered. We'd been married for 12 years. That evening, watching her walk toward the kitchen, I realized I didn't remember the last time she looked at me the way she used to. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. We were still sharing the same space. Same dinner table, same bed, same mailbox filled with junk and bills. But there was something between us now. A layer. Like glass. I could see her. I could hear her. But I couldn't reach her. And worse, I wasn't sure she even noticed. At first, I told myself it was stress. Work had been demanding for her lately. She'd just taken on a new role at the design firm, more hours, tighter deadlines. I convinced myself that it was temporary. That all couples go through this. That all I needed to do was be patient, supportive, and present. But there were these tiny moments that chipped away at that hope. Like how she suddenly stopped texting me during the day. No more midday thinking of you messages. Just silence. Or how she began going to bed before me every night, turning away the second she lay down. And how on weekends she started making plans I wasn't part of. Brunches with old friends, late evening gallery visits I never got invited to. Still, I didn't want to ask questions. I didn't want to become the insecure husband who interrogated his wife. I wanted to believe we were stronger than that. That if something was wrong, she'd tell me. But the worst part? Deep down, I already knew something was wrong. I just wasn't ready to hear it out loud. One night, maybe a week after the tea moment, I walked into the living room and found Marion sitting on the couch with her laptop. Her face was lit by the screen, eyes locked in deep focus. I asked her something. I don't even remember what, and she didn't respond. I asked again, a little louder. Still nothing. Then I stepped closer and saw that she was wearing earbuds. Not just watching something, but fully immersed. She didn't even realize I was there. I stood in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds longer than I should have. Watching her. Realizing I felt more like a guest in my own home than a husband. And I wondered, not for the first time, if maybe she was building a world I no longer existed in. But I didn't confront her. I just walked away, quietly. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I didn't really need, and stared at my reflection in the window. I saw a man who was still holding on, hoping the silence meant nothing. But silence is never nothing. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Quiet, soft, almost polite in its cruelty. A love story that hadn't exploded, but evaporated. And I was the only one trying to hold vapor in my hands. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't cry. I didn't ask. I just whispered to myself, "It's probably nothing," and went to bed alone, next to someone who used to reach for my hand in the dark. And that was the first night I realized she didn't anymore. It's strange how many memories take on new meaning in hindsight. You don't even realize you're collecting puzzle pieces until the picture starts forming on its own. One of those pieces came in the form of a conversation I overheard in late October. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I'd walked into the house early from work because the power had gone out at my office. A random storm had pulled down some lines, and they sent us all home. I didn't text Marion because I thought it'd be a nice surprise. I was wrong. The moment I stepped through the front door, I could hear her upstairs, talking on the phone in that tone she never used with me anymore. Soft, a little playful. I froze. Not because she was doing anything wrong, not exactly, but because it was the first time in months I'd heard that version of her. I stood there, quietly, listening to the words drift down the staircase. She was talking about music. Something about a jazz club that had a live set on Fridays. She laughed, really laughed, and said something like, "That sounds perfect. Don't tempt me." I didn't catch the rest. I didn't want to. I walked back out the door, shut it behind me like I'd just forgotten something in the car, and sat behind the wheel for 25 minutes. I never asked who she was talking to. That night, I told her the office had sent us home early. She looked surprised, then slightly nervous. It was so brief I almost missed it, but her hands paused over the salad she was mixing. Then she smiled and said, "Oh, that must have been nice." She asked nothing more. In that moment, I didn't feel like her husband. I felt like a polite coworker who had stopped by unexpectedly. We finished dinner. She went to bed early again. I stayed up in the den, staring at an unopened book, trying to find a reason to believe I was imagining things. But I wasn't. I just didn't want the truth yet. There's something humiliating about being slowly erased from someone's life without the courtesy of a goodbye. Not a dramatic one, not even a whispered one. Just the quiet subtraction of presence. I started noticing she never used my name anymore. She used to say Wally when she wanted something or Wallace when she was annoyed. But lately it was just hey or nothing at all. I didn't realize how much I missed the sound of my own name in her mouth until it vanished. Then there was the candle. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but I remember it like it was burned into my brain. One afternoon, I came home early again. I'd been feeling dizzy at work, nothing major, and when I opened the front door, I smelled a scent I didn't recognize. Something rich, almost too warm. It wasn't one of the candles we usually bought together from that little store on Maple. This one was more intentional. Sensual, even. When I walked into the living room, Marian was just blowing it out. She smiled at me like nothing was unusual. "You're home early again," she said. I nodded. She didn't explain the candle, and I didn't ask. I just stared at the smoke rising from it, wondering who it had been burning for. That night I sat in our bedroom, scrolling through old pictures on my phone. Not because I missed her, but because I missed the person she used to be with me. I found one photo that wrecked me more than I expected. It was from a road trip to Asheville. She had her feet up on the dashboard, had turned toward me with that half smile she always gave right before saying something smart or sarcastic. I remember taking the photo because I'd thought, this is what home feels like. But now, sitting alone next to the same woman who no longer smiled like that, I couldn't understand how something so certain had become so distant. A week later, I finally asked her, "Are you happy?" She looked up from her laptop, confused. "What do you mean? Just, are you happy with me? With us?" There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Then she forced a smile and said, "Of course I am." But her eyes didn't match her mouth. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because I couldn't figure out when I stopped being enough. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breath slow beside me, and wondered if she'd already made peace with losing me. The hardest part wasn't that she might be seeing someone else. It was the fear that maybe she wasn't, maybe she just didn't love me anymore and hadn't for a long time. And I, in my blind loyalty, hadn't noticed the soil turning to sand under our feet. And the real cruelty? She hadn't said a word. Not even goodbye. Not yet. There's a type of silence that doesn't just fill the room, it presses into your ribs. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of something unspoken that hums beneath everything. That was the silence Marian and I lived in now. We didn't fight. We didn't shout. We didn't cry. We just coexisted. Like two radio stations playing on slightly different frequencies under the same roof. I remember a Sunday morning when I made breakfast the way I used to when we were first married. Eggs soft, toast a little too brown, coffee with that strange creamer she liked that I never understood. I placed it all in front of her without saying a word. She looked up, startled for a second, like I'd interrupted a thought she'd been deep inside. Then she smiled. A small, polite smile. The kind you give a neighbor when they wave across the street. She said, "Thank you," and took a sip of the coffee. But that was it. No warmth. No teasing me about the burnt toast. No half-laugh about how I always use too much salt. Just a sip. A thank you. And the soft clink of the spoon in her cup. I watched her eat in silence, and in that moment, I realized I had become a background character in her life. I was no longer someone she reacted to. I was just there. A piece of furniture, familiar and dependable, but no longer noticed. And the worst part? I still loved her. Every single day, I still loved her. Not the version of her sitting across from me, but the version I still remembered. That morning, I went to the garage and pulled down a box labeled winter stuff. Inside, under scarves and mismatched gloves, was an old Polaroid camera we used to take everywhere. Before smartphones, before GPS, before schedules and endless plans. We used it on hikes, at concerts, even once in a photo booth we snuck into on a dare. I wiped the dust off the lens and loaded it with film. And then I waited. I told myself that maybe if I could get her to laugh, really laugh, I'd know she was still in there somewhere. The woman I married. The woman who once pressed her cold feet against mine at night just to annoy me. So I asked her if she wanted to go out for a walk. Nothing special. Just a walk through the old part of town where the trees still hung low and the sidewalks cracked around the roots. She agreed. No hesitation. But no enthusiasm either. Just a soft sure. like it didn't matter either way. We walked for 30 minutes. Barely spoke. I took one photo, a blurry shot of her looking up at the branches as the light broke through. She didn't ask to see it. She didn't ask why I brought the camera. She just kept walking. When we got home, she went straight upstairs. I stayed on the porch for a long time. I looked at that photo later. I stared at it for maybe 15 minutes, trying to decide what was missing. She looked beautiful, calm, thoughtful, but her eyes weren't engaged. They weren't looking at anything in particular. Not the leaves, not the sky, not me. She was looking through the world, not at it. That night, I left the photo on the kitchen counter. The next morning, it was gone. Not pinned up, not tucked into the fridge. Just gone. She never mentioned it. And I never asked. Because deep down, I already understood. You don't need screaming or slammed doors to feel abandoned. Sometimes, the quiet neglect hurts more. Because it makes you wonder if you were ever really seen in the first place. Or if you were just standing in the right place when someone needed something. And now, she didn't need me. Or maybe, she didn't want to need me anymore. It's hard to explain to someone what it's like to stand next to a person and feel further from them than you do from strangers at the grocery store. I used to think distance was measured in footsteps or miles. But there's a kind of distance that settles between two people who sleep beneath the same roof, share the same coffee machine, fold the same towels, and yet feel like shadows passing in different hours of the same life. I didn't notice it until she started rearranging things. Quietly, carefully, nothing dramatic, just gradual replacements. The navy blue blanket from our first apartment was suddenly gone, replaced by one she said felt softer. The record player we used every Sunday morning sat unplugged for weeks, then disappeared. I asked once, casually, "Did you move the records?" She said, "They're in the guest room closet." But I never found them there. One afternoon, I came home and found the bookshelf reorganized. All the spines that used to sit in pairs, hers and mine, side by side like old friends, were now grouped by color. Aesthetically pleasing, yes, but cold, impersonal. Like she was designing a life for someone to look at, not live in. I remember running my hand across the shelf, feeling the edges of the books. My favorites had been moved to the bottom row, almost hidden. Hers were now the ones at eye level. I never said anything. A few days later, she told me she was going to visit her sister upstate for the weekend. She packed a small bag, kissed me on the cheek like a neighbor would, and said, "Don't forget to water the plants." She used to write me notes. She used to send me photos from the train. She used to ask if I missed her. Now, it was instructions for plant care and the soft click of the door closing behind her. That weekend, the house didn't feel empty. It felt normal. And that terrified me more than anything. I sat in the living room Saturday evening with the lamp on low, sipping tea from a mug she forgot she gave me. It had our anniversary printed in fading gold script on the side. I hadn't used it in years. She always put it on the top shelf where I never reached. But that night, I climbed up, dusted it off, and drank from it like I needed to remember something solid. There was a smell in the house that didn't belong. Not perfume, something sharper, unfamiliar. A scent that carried something new, not nostalgic. I checked the laundry room. A shirt of hers I didn't recognize was hung over the edge of the hamper. A color she never wore. Pale green, lightly wrinkled, slightly scented. It wasn't mine. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring at it like it had spoken. On Sunday, I drove. Nowhere important. Just roads that twisted far enough to let my thoughts wander. I passed towns we used to stop in. An antique shop where we once bought a crooked mirror because she said it had personality. A corner diner where she spilled ketchup on her blouse and laughed so loud people turned around. Back then, she used to lean into me in booths. Now, she leaned away in silence. I parked the car and sat for nearly 2 hours in a lot behind a grocery store. I didn't cry. I didn't think about other men. I didn't make up scenarios. I just sat with the ache of feeling unnecessary. Not disliked. Not hated. Just forgotten. When she returned that night, her smile was practiced. Soft. Controlled. I asked, "How was your sister?" She said, "Fine." I nodded. She unpacked nothing. That night, she fell asleep quickly. And I lay beside her, wide awake, thinking to myself how strange it was that someone can come home and bring less of themselves back each time. I remember the sound the drawer made. Her nightstand, the second one on the left, the one she used to keep photos and postcards in. She opened it at 11:06 p.m., a full hour after we'd both gone to bed. I didn't ask what she was looking for. She didn't explain. But the sound, the slow pull, the pause, the muted thud when she closed it again, it stayed with me longer than it should have. That's the thing about quiet changes. They collect in you. You don't realize how many moments you've swallowed until they start pressing back from the inside. She'd been sighing more lately. Not the kind of sigh that comes from tired legs or a long shift. These were lighter, more breathy. Reflective, like her body was reacting to thoughts I wasn't allowed to know. I caught myself counting them sometimes. 3 sighs before brushing her hair. 2 during dinner. 1 while staring at her phone. A symphony of tiny exits performed in silence. I didn't ask what was wrong. I was afraid she'd say, nothing, and I'd have no choice but to believe it. Because if you have to ask someone to explain why they've become a stranger, it's already too late. She started humming again. That used to be my favorite sound, Marian humming to herself as she folded towels or walked from one room to another. But now it sounded like it belonged to a life I wasn't in. A private melody that wasn't meant to be shared. I followed her into the living room one night just to ask what she was humming. She looked at me, confused. What do you mean? That tune, I said. You were humming something. She blinked, then shook her head. Was I? I don't even remember. And that was worse. Because now even her instincts had left me behind. That night, I opened an old wooden box I kept in the closet. It was filled with letters we'd written to each other in our early years. Folded pages with inside jokes, little confessions, fragments of futures we thought were inevitable. I ran my fingers over her handwriting, strong but curved, confident but warm. It didn't feel like it belonged to the same woman who now walked through the house as if everything had to be done in a straight line. There was a letter she wrote on our 5th anniversary. The ink had faded in one corner, but I could still read the words. Even when I don't say it out loud, I love the way you look at me. Like you still see all the parts of me I forget to show. I closed the box slowly. I hadn't looked at her like that in a long time. And I realized, maybe she hadn't shown them in a long time either. The following evening, we stood in the kitchen together. Same room, same fridge hum, same cracked tile by the sink that we never fixed. She reached for a glass from the cabinet, and I said, out loud, "Do you miss us?" She turned, startled. Then something in her face tightened. Not anger. Not guilt. Something else. What do you mean us? She asked. It wasn't an attack. Just empty curiosity. Like someone reading a phrase in a foreign language and trying to pronounce it. I don't know, I said. I guess. I just mean the version of us that used to laugh at the same time. Or finish each other's thoughts. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she gave a slow nod. The kind people give when they don't know what else to offer. I think we changed, she said gently. And maybe we didn't do it at the same pace. Then she left the room. And I stood there for maybe an hour, holding the same glass I'd pulled from the cabinet just moments before. I didn't drink from it. I don't even remember why I took it out. I just needed something to hold on to. The hallway light had begun flickering again. It was something I'd meant to fix for months, maybe more, but like everything else in our home lately, it stayed broken just quietly enough to ignore. I'd catch the stutter of light from the corner of my eye, blinking like a failing memory, and I'd tell myself I'd get around to it. But I never did. Sometimes I think we treat relationships the same way we treat old houses. We live around the cracks instead of patching them. We stop opening certain doors. We adjust to drafts and creaks and shadows that didn't used to be there. And eventually, we stop noticing how much colder it's gotten. Marian and I had stopped speaking in full sentences. Not because we were angry, but because there was nothing left that needed saying. The essentials were covered: groceries, schedules, what time we'd be out or back. But the invisible glue that used to hold our conversations together, those little "did you notice" or "I thought of you when," they had vanished, so silently it felt like they'd never existed. I started leaving the house earlier in the mornings. I didn't need to, my office didn't open until 9, but I couldn't bear the quiet of eating breakfast next to someone who didn't look up anymore. I'd take my coffee in a travel mug and sit in the parking lot of a closed bookstore 2 blocks from work. I'd watch the sun rise through the windshield and let it warm the side of my face, as if pretending the world was still soft in the ways that mattered. One morning, I watched a couple walking by. They were older, late 60s, maybe, and the woman was holding the man's arm like the ground might shift beneath her if she let go. They moved slowly but with purpose, like they had somewhere to be even if it wasn't urgent. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt this swell of grief. Not envy, not even sadness, just a quiet understanding that we were never going to be them. Not because of anything cruel, but because whatever bound us, me and Marion, had slowly come undone, and neither of us had the words or the bravery to admit it aloud. One night that week, I came home later than usual. I stood outside the front door for a long time, keys in hand, listening. There was a dim light glowing behind the curtain. No shadows moved inside. No music. No hum of conversation. Just the stale, still air of a house that had stopped waiting for someone to come home. When I stepped inside, Marion was curled up on the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket I didn't recognize. A book lay open on her lap, face down, the spine pressing into the cushion. She didn't look up. "I didn't hear you come in," she said softly. "I didn't want to wake you." I lied. She nodded once. A small, distant gesture. Then, "There's pasta in the fridge." I stood there for a second too long. Then I said thank you and walked past her. I didn't eat. Later that night, I sat alone in the guest room. I told her I needed space to finish some writing. That was the excuse. The truth? I needed to know what it felt like to be alone in a room, without pretending we weren't already strangers. The silence was cleaner in there. Honest. Uncomplicated. I found myself staring at the window for almost an hour, not looking out of it, just at it, tracing the condensation along the glass, watching it drip, slowly, in soft rivulets. And for some reason I thought, this is how it ends. Not in a storm, but in the quiet drip of everything we once cared for, disappearing one unnoticed drop at a time. We hadn't touched in weeks. Not out of punishment, just absence. Like we were both afraid of what it would mean to reach across the bed and find no one reaching back. The following day, she left a note on the fridge. 3 lines. "Working late. Don't wait up. Left the porch light on. Good night." I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because it felt like something she'd write to a guest. That night, I didn't sleep in the guest room. I didn't sleep at all. I stood in the hallway for hours, staring at the flickering light. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I was waiting for a version of me that used to live here. There's a small closet at the end of the hall, across from the bathroom. We never used it for much. A few extra linens. An old vacuum. A shoebox or 2 filled with things we didn't need, but couldn't throw away. That's where I stood one night, with the door half open, staring at the shelf where our wedding album used to be. It was gone. I didn't panic. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't tear the place apart looking for it. I just stood there, staring at the empty space where it once sat. The indentation in the dust. The faint rectangular shadow on the wood. The quiet, unceremonious absence. I closed the door slowly. That was 2 days before I heard her whisper someone's name in her sleep. It wasn't mine. She said it gently, almost apologetically. Not in desire, but in comfort. Like someone reaching for a memory they didn't realize they were still holding. I stayed perfectly still beside her, eyes open in the dark, heart not racing but settling, like a stone finally dropping to the bottom of a lake. I didn't ask her about it in the morning. I didn't want to hear a lie shaped like kindness. The next afternoon, I found her sitting in the backyard. She had headphones in. Her eyes were closed. The sunlight caught in her hair in that familiar way that used to make me want to write poems I'd never show her. I watched from the window, unseen. And for a moment, I thought she looked happy. And I realized, it had nothing to do with me. Later that evening, I opened my laptop and started typing a letter. Not to her. Not to anyone. Just to the air. To myself. To the ghost version of the man I used to be. I didn't know what I was trying to say. I just knew I hadn't spoken honestly in a very long time. I'm still here. But I don't know why. I don't think she would notice if I disappeared. Not right away. Maybe not at all. That hurts more than I thought it would. I saved the file with no name and closed the screen. That night, I made dinner. I didn't ask if she was hungry. I didn't ask when she'd be home. I just cooked what I used to cook when we were happy, roasted vegetables, her favorite garlic noodles, that soft bread with sea salt butter. I placed everything on the table, lit a candle, not for her, but for the memory of that version of us. She came in late, saw the setup, smiled. "That looks nice," she said. I nodded. I thought we could have dinner. She hesitated in the doorway, like someone unsure of the room they just walked into. I already ate. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was a release. I sat down and ate anyway, one bite at a time. She disappeared upstairs, footsteps careful, like she was trying not to be heard, or maybe not to hear herself. I stayed there with my plate, chewing slowly, listening to the house shift around me. The faucet dripping, the fridge humming. my chair creaking against the floor. And then, the sound that shattered me more than any scream ever could. She closed the door to the bedroom, clicked the lock, not because she was afraid of me, but because she wanted to be alone in her world, and I wasn't part of it anymore. That was the first night I didn't try to follow. I didn't knock. I didn't sit outside the door hoping she'd change her mind. I walked to the laundry room, pulled the comforter off the drying rack, and made a bed for myself on the living room couch. I lay there in the soft glow of the porch light, surrounded by the air freshener we'd both grown used to, and I imagined the wedding album. Maybe under her car seat, maybe in her drawer at work, maybe burned or buried or simply discarded in a donation box. Wherever it wasn't with us anymore. And neither was she. The morning I left, there wasn't a single moment of drama. No suitcase slamming shut. No shouting. No handwritten letter folded on a pillow. Just light, soft, and unfamiliar, pouring in through the living room window and touching everything like it was seeing it for the first time. I hadn't planned it. Not exactly. But something had shifted overnight. I woke up on the couch with a strange calm inside me. Not the kind that makes you question everything. The kind that confirms it. The kind that says, this isn't giving you life anymore. And that's okay. I walked quietly through the kitchen, letting my fingers brush the counters I used to wipe down while she danced barefoot beside me. The ghost of those moments didn't sting anymore. They just smiled faintly and passed on. I took one mug from the cupboard, the one with the chipped handle that only I ever used, and made coffee. No cream, no sugar, just the way I liked it before I started changing little things to match her preferences. And while it brewed, I opened the window. The air outside was cool and smelled like new grass. There were birds, but not the noisy kind. Just enough to remind me the world hadn't stopped just because we had. She came downstairs half an hour later, robe tied loosely, hair swept to one side like she used to wear it when she still cared what I thought. She didn't look surprised to see me awake, or dressed, or calm. Her voice was soft. You heading somewhere? I nodded. Yeah. For how long? I paused. Not to create suspense. I just wanted to answer honestly. I think for good. She blinked. No tears. No panic. Just a stillness between us I couldn't quite name. And then she nodded. Once. Like she knew. Maybe she'd known longer than I had. I didn't mean for it to feel like this, she whispered. I know, I said. And I did. That's the part people never talk about. Not all endings are made of cruelty. Some just grow apart like shorelines after the tide pulls away. No one burns the house down. No one steals the light. It just fades. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop pretending it hasn't. I didn't say goodbye in a grand way. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't even leave a note. But as I stepped out the door, I did whisper something. Not for her. For me. Thank you for the beginning. Because there was love once. Real love. And it deserved to be honored, not resented. I drove without music. Just the windows down, wind moving through me like breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I didn't have a plan. No hotel reservation. No new address. Just forward. And somewhere outside the city, with the sun coming up slow and golden over a field I'd never seen before, I pulled over. I stood beside the car, hands in my pockets, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. Not in the way people chase after in movies, but in the quiet, personal way that feels like coming home to yourself. So this is what I'll leave you with, not regret, not sadness, not even heartbreak. Just a truth I had to live to understand. Some love stories end in silence. But that doesn't mean the person who walks away does so empty. Sometimes, they leave whole.